Hey, what's going on, guys? Dom the Movie Nerd here, and have you heard the good word? Game of Thrones is back! Well, not really, but the first official spin-off, House of the Dragon, is set to premiere next year on HBO, and that got me thinking about how Game of Thrones, the #1 most-watched show for a decade, just seemingly disappeared from the culture after that god-awful finale. And I wanted to find out why, which is why I'm proud to present the newest hit show from the Talkin' TV network, Talkin' Thrones, the new weekly show where myself and friend of the channel, Professor Pat Huber, get together to break down each and every single episode of this hit show. We've got focus character segments, we break down the lore, we go over some old reviews, all to get to the question of where did this show go wrong? It's a really fun time. You guys are not going to want to miss this. So head over to the Talkin' TV channel on YouTube and Spotify to check it out. We go live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Audio goes up the following Saturday. It's going to be a really great time as we once again battle it out for the throne. Well, people, we're officially back for the podcast side of things. This time we've got another double episode. We're finally dipping back into the realm of TV for our summer movie series. We've got two for you guys today. Again, we've got the premiere, the long-awaited premiere, let's say, of Ted Lasso Season 2 finally dropping on Apple TV Plus, as well as the return of yet another infamous filmmaker who at times we just feel like we just can't get rid of. That, of course, being M. Night Shyamalan with his new movie, Old. Chris, you excited?
It's always fun when we have a double feature here on the podcast, so hell yeah, man. Let's get into it.
Especially considering that this is very similar to our last double feature. All of that and more. Stay tuned. All right, Chris, I think this is like a first time for me as far as just our podcast goes, because we're talking about a show that I'll admit I was not the biggest fan of when it came out in the way that like everyone else was. I didn't see the hype for it. I just didn't think that I could get into it. I just wasn't sure if it was my cup of tea. I wasn't sure really just what the show was trying to accomplish overall. I was really confused by it. I'm like, okay, is it going for the typical mean-spirited comedy, but then it's like being really nice at one point? Like, I was kind of a little bit confused. And I think that now that we have a new episode of Ted Lasso, I think the other thing too, obviously, to keep in mind is that it was really the only new original kind of non-IP oriented show that we got during the pandemic. So that was, of course, a big thing in and of itself. But we have this second season premiere of Ted Lasso Season 2, something that we haven't done for the podcast in quite a little bit as far as that goes. Just what were your general thoughts kind of going into Season 2? I know you were obviously a huge fan of the first season, but...
Yeah, the first season is probably one of my favorite seasons of television. I just think it's so expertly crafted. I love the journeys the characters take. I think what's so fascinating about it is the show starts off as one thing and completely changes into another. Like I tweeted, I said, Ted Lasso supersedes the comedy genre. If you can't see that, then you need to be more attentive of a film watcher. And I definitely stand by that, because there's just so many moments that forego comedy for the sake of actual bonds or actual meaningful character exchanges or growth. And it's just kind of like, I hope not alone in its standing in regards to those types of sentiments. I hope it's kind of going to usher in a new wave of shows that follow in its footsteps in regards to like balancing the comedy with the drama, with the, you know, the seriousness of the situations, with the growth of the characters, because it kind of, yeah, it's marketed as a comedy, and of course marketing needs to happen so people can at least watch it. You know, putting butts in seats gives a show a Season 2, as we're about to talk about with Ted Lasso's debut of Season 2, but it's like, to only call it a comedy, I think, sells this show really short, especially Sudeikis, because, man, oh man, is he really showing his chops? So, yeah, I think with that sort of like reprisal there of my thoughts and feelings about Season 1, I think going into Season 2, my bar was very high, because I think it did things in a Season 1 that most shows don't really come into their own and do in like maybe like a Season 3 or 4, if we're talking about like this style of half-hour, more comedy-driven, television-based content. And so, yeah, it had a high bar to achieve, and we've only seen one episode so far, but I would say we're off to a good start. I really enjoyed this episode. I liked picking up with all the characters. characters where we had left off. I think that there's some interesting new development and some subtle nods to the way certain characters have changed. Example in the form of one Nate, who I'm assuming we're going to find out the power of being an assistant coach now is going to go to his head. And other things subtly as like Roy, who's sort of like, mucking around trying to figure out what to do next and sort of just really kind of lost but not realizing he's lost, where last season he was like, started off as the leader, the star, one of the most legendary players in the league, and now he's kind of like the reverse of the hero's journey, right? Like he started off at like the height and now he's in the abyss, and normally you start off at the bottom and you make your way to the top. So it's pretty interesting to see that like those are just some side characters, and we're already equally as invested as we are in like the journeys of like Ted Lasso and of course, like the owner of the club, as she's now starting to date again and break away from like that like terrible husband of hers. So I think super promising out the gates. We can obviously talk more specific, but before I hand it over to you, the last thing I'll say is like if we're doing like a quick spoiler-free thought, I really enjoyed it, and I think it sets a promising foundation for season 2. But I think I also hope it improves. So where's your take on that?
Well, I find it interesting that this is the first podcast that we're covering after we just dedicated an entire variety show to talking about Physical and Apple TV and kind of what they're doing in terms of changing up kind of the norms that we've kind of associated with the television, with these types of structures of television, especially given that they seem to actually be going for that in ways that other networks like Netflix promised they would and then ultimately didn't. And I think that's probably a big reason why I couldn't get behind Ted Lasso season 1, only because I wasn't quite sure what exactly it was going for. I wasn't quite sure of the identity of the show. I'm like, yeah, this is marketed as a comedy, and I'm like, okay, so you got the producer of Scrubs behind this, and I know that Jason Sudeikis obviously has a big investment in this, but going into it, I was just very confused. I'm like, what ultimately is this trying to accomplish? Because I'm like, it's not laugh out loud funny. It's not mean-spirited funny. It's not joke a minute, mile a minute humor. I really didn't know what to expect. And now that we've had an entire season that, again, ended in the complete opposite way that everyone thought, and now that we're back with season 2, I think I'm ultimately starting to figure out kind of the identity of the show, which I think is starting to finally allow me to appreciate it for what it is, which is that it is actually, like I said, kind of in a weird way, doing what I was talking about with Hacks and with Physical and what all these other quote-unquote comedies have been doing. Even to an extent, Cobra Kai, even though, again, Cobra Kai is not a comedy, as we talked about. What they're doing kind of is essentially now, rather than doing the prestige TV route, which, again, is kind of what Apple is doing with all their shows, they're essentially doing the genre storytelling but as long-form television. And for the most part, it's working spectacularly, because this was the first indication for me that revealed, okay, no, now we are actually getting into, like, the sports drama territory, but we're examining it in a way that, like, really kind of no other sports drama has been examined before, as far as just examining it from all different angles. And we're getting into the tropes, and we're getting into kind of like the superstitions as far as surrounding, different areas of sports characteristics, and we're getting into all of the different kind of areas in which, maybe we wouldn't have had time to cover in a movie before. Like, yeah, what is Roy going to be doing now that he's, not the superstar, now that he's off the team and kind of in this weird semi-retirement spot? What is Ted going to be doing in order to handle his new players, in order to make sure that they get the proper training that they need, while continuing that, never-ending, that constantly never-ceasing amount of positive attitude? And I think the thing that I took away particularly from this episode was just kind of how much more we're going to get inside Ted's head this season, right? Season 1 was kind of us getting introduced to him, us getting acclimated to the environment, right? Because, again, it's kind of, I feel like, the selling point of the first season. Okay, it's a very obvious, like, American in Britain, in a weird way, kind of doing all those, almost this, like, metatextual layer of, like, okay, like, here's what happens when American comedy meets British comedy, and, like, kind of the stark contrast between those two styles. I actually think that was probably one of the most notable things about the first season, and they're going to continue to do that here. But I think that this episode, we definitely got inside the character of Ted Lasso's head much more so, when he kind of introduced the psychologist character and the apprehension. And I will definitely say that now, again, I'm only one episode in, but I definitely will say that this is probably, I think without a shadow of a doubt, the best balancing act between drama and comedy that I've ever seen. Because, again, for the opening scene to be that new player who was like a shoo-in for like their new Roy or their new Jamie, for him to fucking pull off that stupid shit. where he kills the dog accidentally when he kicks the goal, and then have that be the driving force for the entire rest of the episode. But then for them to take a serious take on it, like so much of the time, like if that were an episode of like The Office, again, not to throw shade towards I know you and everyone else's favorite show, but if that were like an episode of The Office, it would just be like done for laughs throughout the entirety of the episode, them trying to deal with this guy's trauma, you know. But for this episode, they like for the most part are not taking it quote unquote seriously, but like they take it in a they examine it in a manner that feels, I definitely think, more relatable in a way as far as I go, because like you wouldn't expect someone to be that traumatized, and especially seeing that in a comedy, but they do it, and they do it really well. So those are the things that, again, while I'm still not fully on board with the show, I definitely am starting to see kind of more of the things that people are gravitating towards and why the show was like kind of the new it comedy show as far as everything goes. But yeah, where do you think this could potentially go as far as the rest of this season?
Well, before we get into that, I do think it is the new It comedy show. I mean, it got 20 Emmy nominations, which is crazy, just to think about. That's an insane amount. And yeah, the character of Danny Rojas sort of coming in and taking up the role of like the superstar is pretty cool because, you know, we got introduced to him mid last season. He got injured. He wasn't there. They really needed him. And now he's kind of like taking on the mantle of being like the superstar. And it's cool because he's like a very, you know, empathetic team player type character where Jamie Tart was this kind of like pompous, brooding, you know, snobby, I'm the best, you're the worst type of person. And so it's really cool to see like how the team rallies together. Like they do a good job of making everyone in the locker room, those familiar faces, actually have a purpose and importance, you know? And they're even introducing this new Dutch character, and you can kind of tell he's going to be the bit character, but, you know, same as Danny Rojas was the bit character last season, and now look how pivotal he was to the debut episode of season 2. So it's just like, I think this show knows how to manage their ensemble, is really where I'm going with it. And it kind of is a budding, growing cast. I mean, now we have the therapist character getting involved and a few other minor characters. We'll see if this boyfriend or the date that she broke up with, the owner of the club, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but AFC Richmond's owner, we'll see if he comes back in circulation, you know, if she can't find someone else. And it's like these characters that sometimes in other shows are just utility, just to serve a purpose, just to help ease the plot along, they all at least offer something and they feel right and they fit the vibe, you know? So I can definitely respect them for the casting, and I think the Apple TV Plus of it all being so carefully curated, I think it really does shine through in this example. But one thing I wanted to touch upon, you were talking about how it's got so many strong and poignant dramatic moments. Yeah. And I think specifically the moment that comes to mind, my favorite moment from this past week's episode was the press conference after the loss when Danny Rojas unfortunately kicked the dog in the head. And it was so good I had to pause it and write it down because I just couldn't believe that something so profound came from this show. Ted's talking about this dog that he got attacked by as a little kid, and as he grew up it was his neighbor's dog, and you know, the owner's wife passed away, and so he stopped taking care of the dog, and slowly the same creature that attacked him when he was a little kid became his best friend as he was older. And then even when his neighbor moved away and the dog had nowhere to go, Ted took the dog in. And so Ted said something like Sudeikis, man, he really is just, if anything, watch this show for him. Like, if you can't get your head around this type of show, watch your show for like lines like this. Like, I couldn't believe it. Ted says with holding back tears in his eyes, but not in a way where it's like overdone, just the perfect amount of acting in that moment. He says, it's funny to think about the things in your life that could make you cry just knowing that they existed, and can then become the same thing that can make you cry knowing that they're gone. I mean,
crazy.
How did that quote come from Ted Lasso?
Dude, it's
so and that's good. Why I love this show. In a nutshell, that's why I love this show.
Yeah, man. It's funny because, like, I will say that probably my favorite part of the first season was Sudeikis' performance. It's just the fact that, like, even though on the surface it seems like such like a typical comedy performance, once you get down and like you really get to know the character, like it's just the little subtle moments that make you realize, oh no, this is a performance. And like that moment, you're right. And for that to be like, that's like the second major scene of the episode, right? That doesn't happen like at the end. That's not the big grand overall climax. That's the first scene of the episode. And just like him giving off that incredibly profound and really engaging, like heartwarming, but also incredibly sad monologue. It just shows like, no, these people are really taking the time and really putting in the effort to like really get you to know these characters. And as far as Sudeikis' performance go, this is the best that he's ever been. Like, you could tell just how much of an emotional stake that he's got in this character. It becomes even more obvious when you realize how much of his personal life he was putting into this performance. It just makes the performance even better as far as that goes. And like I said, it elevates him above the typical shtick. Again, not to throw shade at all of our beloved American comedies, but like at all the typical, American comedies that we get, because most of the time scenes like that would just be played for laughs and just be like, oh, now we got to handle damage control. But the magic of the show is able to taking a completely ridiculous, silly moment like the player accidentally killing the dog and turn it into an actual, like taking Danny Rojas's accidental murder of the dog and turning it into like this really profound, really almost gut-wrenching emotional statement that kind of, in a weird way, makes you sad but happy at the same time. It's kind of amazing, and if anything, it makes me feel even shittier for how I was towards the first season, because all of this went completely over my head in that first season. But it's definitely something that I'm going to be taking a look like much more forward to now with this second season, because it's incredible stuff as far as that goes, and I definitely think it's something that any young writer per se needs to take away from, as far as if they want to, write as far as lessons as far as to how to write a really compelling lead character.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. And, I don't really have much more to add, but the last thing I will say is this. You've been referencing a lot of, like, The Office and shows like that. I do believe, though, we wouldn't have Ted Lasso if we hadn't had the Communities, the How I Met Your Mothers, The Offices before it. You can see signs of heavy drama in certain episodes of Community, The Office, How I Met Your Mother. Even if you go a little bit earlier back, like the King of Queens and Everybody Loves Raymond era, but I just think it's kind of just the nature of the beast, right? Like, art continues to grow, and art is inspired by what came before it. So I do see some Office in this. I do see some Michael Scott, but then I also see some serious drama and some elements that we kind of got with the whole Jim and Pam's relationship there. And so I think this is a more refined version, but I do think you don't have Ted Lasso without, your Communities or your amazing sitcoms that came before this show. So I wouldn't say it's throwing shade. If you feel that way, I'm almost curious as to why you think it's shade. To me, I just think that's the nature of art and the way it develops and grows over time.
No, absolutely. And if we're talking about like old shows, this show is directly indebted to Scrubs, because Bill Lawrence is the co-creator of this show. Again, I've never seen a single episode of Scrubs, but I know that one had its beloved fan base. And I wouldn't say it's throwing shade. I'd say it's just a matter of you're absolutely right. This show is indebted to those shows, because those shows like kind of barred the way for just comedy television in order to come to where it is now. But I'm just talking about as far as like certain things that like I wasn't the biggest fan of those shows that like, oh, this show seems to have finally taken that lesson and now is doing it right, because you're right. Drama has always been their underlying comedy. It's just that now that we have all this freeform, loose area in order to experiment now, that we don't have kind of those network hampers and censors as far as that goes, that just the possibilities are endless as far as what they can accomplish storytelling-wise, and the things that I've been wanting from comedies for so long that for the most part I would say I haven't gotten, we're now finally starting to get. That's kind of what I meant by that. As far as that statement goes, and yeah, this makes me excited for the rest of this season. Which again, I think that's the first time I've been able to say that about a comedy show in a while. And again, even just calling it a comedy, I feel like is doing the show a disservice, because again, it's kind of in a weird way the same thing that we were talking about with Cobra Kai, where it's really only a comedy because of the half-hour episode format. And even that really, I don't think like does this episode justice, because how long was this episode? Like 34 minutes, something like that?
I believe it was 34, yeah.
That for all intents and purposes is like a shortened dramatic episode to me. And so before we wrap up with this segment, before we get into our movie of the week, I just wanted to ask you what your favorite moment from this episode was, because I have mine and I want you to see if you can guess what mine is, but I want to hear yours first.
I think my favorite moment was that moment that Ted Lasso talks about to Trent Krim about the dog and his relationship with the beast, and that quote that I read off. But I do have a runner-up moment that I thought was equally as like beautiful in the same sense, where Keely is outside of the restaurant and they walk over to AFC Richmond's owner. I keep forgetting her name, the tall blonde woman, and she says, "So, what did you think
Rebecca,
of him?" And
I believe.
Rebecca, yep, thank you. And she says, "What do you think?" to Rebecca. Rebecca says, "What do you think?" to Keely, and Keely's like, "Oh, he's great. He can match your income. He's super nice. He's charming." And then Roy just goes, Jesus Christ, like, no. If he doesn't make you feel like you've been struck by effing lightning, then he's not right for you, because you're amazing and you should know that. And that's just, for as lost as Roy is, they didn't lose sight of the strength of his character. That's what that moment showed me. On top of it just being like a beautiful sentiment about like relationships and sort of the way that you shouldn't settle in life on anything, it's just that just shows me how in control these writers are. Even with Roy being in this transition period, the strength that we saw him have in the past is still there. He just needs to find a new way to funnel it. And I thought it was very brilliant. But that's got to be my runner-up moment. But what about you?
Oh man, that's tough because there were a lot of good moments from this episode. I love the moment. I love that moment. That was a great moment, honestly. You're right, Roy. If I had to pick one favorite character from last season, I mean, I love Coach Beard just as far as how he's always kind of like the voice of wisdom that's always kind of there, and that's pretty sure like they just have the co-creator of the show or one of the co-creators and executive producers, Brendan Hunt, and they just wrote this role for him. So I love that character, but I definitely think that Roy was probably my standout because that was another character that could have fallen such into type territory, but he manages to get like just such this rich ethos and pathos across as far as like kind of what he's dealing with, and he once again nails that in this first episode. But for me, it's a like almost unanimous tie between the Ted monologue at the beginning just because of Sudeikis' performance in that. I'm like, Jesus Christ, how the fuck do you top what you did in season 1? But he does that there in one scene. And then for me, it was the scene at the end where you see Roy hanging out with his yoga moms and they're all watching that show. And he sees fucking Jamie on there, and he just starts, and he does the thing that he did in the restaurant where he's like, top me off, please, where he's fucking infuriated by the fact that they're still into Jamie, and I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, this is where it brings it back to like that comedy moment, but it's that one insert moment where it's just like, oh man, this is fucking brilliant. It's like the build up to the joke, and the payoff is so good. It's like, he just can't get rid of this guy. He finally like got rid of him in the last season, and now he's back. He just can't escape from him.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Jamie says, I'm the island's top scorer sexually.
Oh my God. Oh my
so
God.
Stupid.
Fucking Jamie.
So stupid.
I'm very interested to see how they're going to use Jamie, especially since pretty much I feel like every single person in this cast, in the main cast lineup, got an Emmy nomination except for Jamie. Phil Dunster is literally the only one. Like even the fucking Rebecca's what's it called, co-manager, the Jeremy Swift character, I can't remember his name, even he got a nomination and Jamie was the only one. So I just found that to be like really a really funny tidbit. And it was just a moment, like I said, this isn't a show that I go to where I get like hard bust out loud laughs from, but like that was one moment where I'm like, okay, that's pretty great.
Yeah, I agree.
That goes.
Cool. Yeah, man. So that's our coverage of Ted Lasso, the season 2 premiere. What did you guys think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Please give this video a like. It really does help the channel. And please subscribe, guys. Just so you guys know, there is only, and this is serious. This isn't a joke, Dom. So please take this seriously. 41% of your subscribers are not, 41% of your viewership is not subscribed to your channel. Guys, listen, you come here already enough. I mean, 41%, that's a decent amount. Please subscribe. Hit that button. All it takes is one click, and then, hey, if you're there, you might as well turn the bell on for notifications. But we're not even trying to get you to go that far. I mean, if you do that, that's awesome. Just hit the subscribe button, please, and then, of course, hit that bell for notifications, because 41%, we want to change that. We want to get that down to like 2%. So help us out. And with that being said, we hope we can help you out in regards to this next topic by avoiding a train wreck. But anyways, maybe I've already said too much.
For real, dude. I mean, this is where we get into our next, by the way, fucking brilliant transition, by the way. And I was about to say, and hey, man, if anything, I'm just trying to pump you up. I'm absolutely taking this serious. I just want to pump you up because you're so much better at delivering that statistic than I am, because statistics and me, they don't go well together. But speaking of statistics, it is a relatively well-known statistic that if there is a new M. Night Shyamalan movie coming out, it's going to be a fucking train wreck. And I feel like this is no surprise, but the reason why I feel like this particular movie that we're about to talk about is so fascinating is because this is the first time in a while where, for lack of a better word, M. Night Shyamalan is back, kind of, in a weird way, because, like, M. Night Shyamalan, right, it's one of the most strangest and most fascinating careers in Hollywood, but I think there's a reason why, even with the continually decreasing quality of his movies, we continue to keep track of it, because, right, he has his giant breakout in 99, which is, like, one of the, still to me, like, the greatest year for movies ever, with The Sixth Sense, obviously. He directed 2 movies before that, but those movies never got really any international, or really, I think, even theatrical distribution. So he breaks out with The Sixth Sense, which, by the way, the origin behind that movie, I'll leave it out of this podcast, and I'll wait until I do my Shyamalan ranked video on Wednesday. But the origin story behind The Sixth Sense is one of the funniest origin stories in all of Hollywood. It's fucking amazing. If you get a chance to go and read some behind the scenes of how The Sixth Sense got picked up, please do, because I promise you guys, you will not be disappointed. It's amazing. But So he does that, huge international success, right? Then he does Unbreakable, and Unbreakable, I still really like Unbreakable. I think that's like probably his only other like great movie that he's done since then. And the problem is the press surrounding Sixth Sense and Unbreakable definitely goes to his head a little bit, and he starts to think, okay, I can't do any wrong. And it doesn't help the fact that everyone in Hollywood is trying to throw him money, you know, because of how much money The Sixth Sense made. So he does Signs in the Village after Unbreakable, and those movies, while not bad, are also not great. They start to get a little bit into his like pretentious territory where he's starting to really hone in on these bad types of characters and this really, really terrible dialogue and the gimmicks of the twist. And the problem is, I think I started to nail kind of the overall problem with his movies, which is his over-reliance on dialogue and explanation over actual action. And that's a problem that can be found really in his first two movies, but I think the difference is that The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable were both when he was like actually, I don't know if he had like mentors per se, but he was definitely, I feel like, putting a little bit more thought into like kind of the mechanics and intricacies of the stories, because they were very much largely oriented around their twists. Those two movies felt oriented around their twist. The rest of his movies felt like they just had the twist because he was obligatorily required to put them in. So after The Village comes out, right? And I feel like The Village where people really started to turn, because the whole thing is the trailers kind of screwed him over because they put the twist for The Village in the trailer. So the movie didn't even have the impact that it was supposed to. Then we get into his late 2000s, early 2010s train, where it's just like, Shyamalan, what the fuck are you doing? Where his 4 in a row from 06 to 13 are Lady in the Water, The Happening, the Avatar: The Last Airbender live action movie, and After Earth. Four of not only the biggest box office bombs of that decade of film, but also quite possibly 4 of the worst movies just in general ever made. I did watch The Happening for the first time the other night. That movie is fucking hilarious, but in all of the wrong ways. First, number one problem, never cast Mark Wahlberg in an intelligent part, because the two are like oil and water. They just don't mix. Like, Mark Wahlberg does not play a smart person conceivably well. And then you see this really weird thing happen where after Earth, he takes a step back and he does this low-budget horror movie, like straight-up horror movie for Blumhouse called The Visit, which from what I heard actually got like a decent amount of praise, right? And that was kind of like, okay, like we know he's kind of lost some of his public favor. He's got to like work his way back. And then he does Split. And Split's a really interesting case because Split is, in a weird way, kind of almost a redo of The Sixth Sense, where Split, obviously, if you have it, obviously, we have seen it, but for anybody who hasn't seen it, spoilers ahead, but Split, when it turns out to be a secret, a secret sequel for Unbreakable, and we're revealed to be getting back into the Unbreakable verse, and like now Shyamalan's getting to do the sequel that he apparently wanted to do back in the day after Unbreakable. He wanted to do the Unbreakable trilogy back in the early 2000s when that came out, but he never got a chance to. And now he gets to do it, and Split by all means is a success. It's his best movie, arguably, since Unbreakable. The twist, it's actually legitimately creepy and frightening. The characters, even though they have some of that Shyamalan dialogue, are still, for the most part, feel like real human beings. And the twist, not only does it actually like play in and actually kind of like make the story cool and relevant, but it does again what he did with The Sixth Sense, which is where it's a twist that nobody saw coming. And he actually like in the age of the internet too, I might add, did a really good job of keeping that a secret. And then Glass comes out, and we're right back to it. It's like we're right back. It's like a vicious cycle. It's like we're right back. Okay, I'm back now. I'm gonna do whatever I want. And while I will say that Glass, for the most part, was a failure, I'll try to give it some credit in the sense of, okay, he was at least trying to do something as far as trying to do some sort of commentary and critique on kind of our superhero obsession. It just failed miserably because once again he just couldn't get out of his own way and started to fall into his old tricks and habits. And now we're at Old, which is now, I don't even know what Shyamalan is trying to do with his career and with the types of movies that he's doing at this point. Shyamalan has always had this really weird obsession with nature and kind of, the effects that it has on man and man's relationship to nature as far as that goes. You see him, and also kind of with religion. You see, obviously, him tackle that big with Signs and The Happening. But again, I'm always in this really weird conundrum whenever I see a Shyamalan movie where, because I've been so conditioned to think that the movie's going to be bad, I'm like, okay, cool. So I know the movie's going to be bad. So now I can just go in and kind of get this, and I can just kind of enjoy it as such. And so you could always imagine my surprise when I'm like, oh, fuck, this is, if not for the fact that this was Shyamalan directing, this might actually, like, have some sort of halfway, like, decent, like, just something going for it here, Because Old, as fucking stupid as it is, and for as fucking, like, asininely, like, up its own ass, and just with the pretentious dialogue with the characters and everything. For all those moments, I do still think there are some moments in this movie that are worth taking some consideration. But I feel like I've talked enough about Shyamalan. Chris, break us down your experience with Old.
Yeah, I think this movie was pitiful. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think when your director cameo is the best acted section of the entire film, that's very upsetting. And trust me, there's a Lost alumni in this, and I wanted to love him, but I really just couldn't. Yeah. It was very hard.
I'm glad you caught that.
Well, yeah, of course, that's my guy. I mean, he was in Star Wars too, you know? It's he gets these parts every now and then, and he gets his moment, and unfortunately, sometimes they're not that good. It's just the fate of the lost actors. But anyways, speaking of, losing things, my interest couldn't have been lost any quicker throughout this movie. I was trying to be the best critic I could be and not be on my phone, not check the time, but I was sitting there so bored, so angry in the theater that I had to be in this movie right now because it was just pitiful. It might be the worst movie of the year. At least with Spiral, we had a good time. This, I didn't have a good time. I didn't enjoy the schlock. I didn't think it was funny. I just thought it was sad and pathetic, and it just felt like I was watching someone's career die. I mean, we're talking about Ted Lasso today, and that's literally a quote when they're talking about Danny Rojas missing the goal, but in that situation, he recovers. In this one, I don't know how M. Night Shyamalan does. And so my initial reaction, I wouldn't recommend this movie to anyone. I think that so far 2021 has been the worst year of movies that I've seen in my life. There's been so many horrible movies to the point where it's almost offensive because I'm thinking about the cost-benefit analysis of sitting there and my time being put towards this movie where it's like I could be doing something productive right now. And that's how strongly I feel about it. Sorry if it's a bit of a downer, guys, but I have to let you know I really disliked this movie. I don't want to use the word hate because I save that for other types of things, not art. I always respect the artist. Shyamalan has made some movies that I really enjoy, like Unbreakable and Signs, but it's just this was not one of those movies that I enjoy, for sure.
Yeah, it's so weird because it's almost like I feel like we got an opposite of The Happening here, where The Happening is marketed as kind of this really creepy, really eerie, what's it called? Oh, we don't know what's killing all these people, but it's going to be really strange, and you don't know, almost marketed like a zombie movie in a weird way, but more so kind of in the first half of zombie movies when it's kind of surreal and you don't know what's happening before kind of the zombie onslaught madness comes in. This, and then when The Happening actually comes out, it's oh no, it's just a campy, cheesy, schlocky B movie at best, And in a weird way, I feel like if you look at it that way, I think it almost kind of works. There are still a lot of problems with The Happening, I feel, but I feel like this almost does the opposite, where the trailer comes out. The trailer is marketed as this over-the-top schlock fest, where it's okay, this is gonna be corny and campy, and so we're just going to tell you everything that's going to be going on, right? Because we know that there's going to be a twist at the end, and now we have to prep you guys for it. And so you can imagine my shock when this movie is, again, problems aside, I think there's an attempt at nuance. I think there's an attempt at kind of some form of a character study, right? Within the first 5 minutes, you should know what kind of a movie you're in. When of course, yes, the kids talking and they're smarter than the parents and they're using dialogue where you're okay, no child in general ever talks like that. You're literally just writing lines in order to prep us for kind of the inevitable aging, which we know is going to happen because we saw it in the trailer. I'm actually going to get into that because I have a big problem with this movie's marketing. But we get to the resort, right? And it's not one of those situations where it immediately feels like everything is wrong in an obvious way, but it definitely kind of feels like, the ticking of the checkbox list where it's okay, so we got to set this up because this is going to happen later. We got to set this up because this is going to happen later. And then we actually get to the beat. The good thing is, like I said, it's weird because Shyamalan is still kind of comes from the old school of Hollywood, and even though his movies are kind of notoriously bad, at the very least, there are still some elements in there where we can get some form of okay, so, the way that movies used to be made, right? Where we do actually get to spend a solid amount of time with the family and getting to know them before they end up going to the beach with all the different people who are there. And so I think that, again, it's horrifically done as far as how it's executed, but I definitely think that kind of the idea of what he's going for, which is, kind of cherish these moments that you have with your loved ones because you don't know how long it's going to last. I think that kind of underlying core idea is probably the strongest element that this movie has going for it, because I think that just with the core four characters, I think that it's still that's probably the parts that work the best, because I will say that that end moment, well, not quite end moment, but getting into spoiler territory a little bit, but that end moment where it's the dad and the mom sitting on the beach, like right before they're about to die. And then kind of like coming to terms with the fact that they are about to die, and coming to terms with like everything that they've been through, everything that happened that day, and realizing that it all kind of didn't matter because at the end of the day they have each other. I think that specific moment in and of itself, that kind of made me, I'm like, okay, this is what he's trying to go for here, you know, because Shyamalan, he's getting a little bit older in his career, you know, he's 50 this year, you know, all of his kids are grown up, so I definitely have a feeling that that's kind of where he's feeling as far as his headspace goes, and so in that sense, I'll give this movie credit, because that sense, I'm like, oh, okay, we actually kind of have, like, some sort of a unifying idea here, right, because and that's what I mean when I say that, like, it's always such kind of a conundrum when we have these Shyamalan movies, because, again, the ideas in and of themselves are not bad ideas, like, you can tell they're not shallow studio-made ideas just to like earn a paycheck. They do come from a creative mindset. The problem is the creative mind from which it comes from is just so beyond up his own ass. Because the problem is, if you literally just had, I swear to God, if he had, I'm like, it's two things. It's two things that he needs. He needs rewrites on all of his scripts in order to make them sound more naturalistic, and he needs somebody else to direct the actors. Because, good Lord, I am sick to death of all of these actors in his movies, like, being directed like aliens, because nobody talks the way that these people do. And, like, this movie sort of, and that gets a pass, but sort of kind of gets around that by having it being like, okay, it is a confined horror setting, right? So, the characters, right, it's usually kind of more digestible as far as when characters, like, start to act a certain way, because we've been conditioned with that for years of horror movies. But then we start to get into the stupid moments. And once we get to the beach, like I said, it sucks because the problem is that half of these moments that happen on the beach were spoiled in the trailer. So by the time, so really, again, it's that classic kind of horror cycle that we've been seeing with a lot of these horror movies, where they put like the first 2/3 in the trailer so we know what's going to happen, which sucks because when the moments happen, when the kids all of a sudden age up into like teenagers, it's actually like really, in hindsight, it should be creepy and it should be horrifying. But because it's in the trailers, we know it's going to happen. And that's where I wanted to get into the marketing. But I wanted to get kind of your take on that as far as that goes. Like, do you think that there was any chance that this movie might have worked better if not for how the marketing played it up? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously you've been doing a lot of research into marketing recently, and movie marketing, and, you know, kind of the part that has to play as far as a movie's impact goes.
Yeah, obviously they spoiled it, but I feel like that's to be expected in the current day and age with the way we know about properties, and that's why I don't watch trailers for the most part, unless it's something that I don't care about it being spoiled, like AKA a Marvel property coming up. So yeah, it's like one of those things where you gotta expect to get some of the, you know, mystery taken away from you, but I think this was a bit egregious. I do agree with you in regards to like specifically targeting that as something to talk about. I personally would not have shown that, but I also think the movie was so ineffective in the way that it showed time and in the way that it sort of spoon-fed the characters their realizations of how this situation was unfolding, and because of that, it was so unbelievable, and the cosmetics, the props, the makeup was just so poorly done. The aging was just so not off-putting in like a emotional way where it's like, wow, I really feel grossed out because this is literally a 6-year-old in the 14-year-old's body. No, just because it was so cheap. It looked cheap. They didn't sell it. The script was weak. The writing was weak. Every motivation, every single sentence uttered in this movie felt like it had no purpose. It just really did not play into the one thing it had, which they spoiled in the marketing, which was this surprise aging scenario and this beach with these properties, which I still really don't understand the properties. What is it? You're sick and you get better, and you're better and you get, like, if you're sick you get better, if you're not sick you get sick. I don't understand. It's just like, okay,
you get old, and then if you get caught, it heals instantly. And it's basically the idea that like the rocks are like putting out this magnesium wave field that like is gonna age people super rapidly, and we haven't even gotten into the twist at the end, which to me fucks this entire thing up, because this is right. And I have to say this too. I have to say this as well. And maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't, but I just had to get this out, which is that I think that this is probably the first instance in a while, right? Where we know that it's kind of, I think M. Night Shyamalan is contractually obligated to put twists in all of his movies now. I think it's just, he's just contractually obligated, even if they don't work half the time. Like I've watched so many of his movies in the last couple days, and I think that that out of all of his twists, I think only 3 of them work. Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Split. Like that, the Happening, that's not even a twist.
I would agree with that.
Signs. The Happening is not even a twist. The Village, again, it happens halfway through the movie, so that I wouldn't even really consider that a twist. Signs, the twist, quote unquote, it's kind of told to us and sprinkled in, and then when it happens, it's kind of just so whatever that you're like, because it's really not effective as part of a movie. Glass, I don't care what anyone says. That shit at the end is fucking hilarious. That's mostly because the twist is so goddamn ineffective because it's so unbelievable, and then once the ways in which all 3 of them die is just so unbelievably fucking like stupid and out of nowhere that like it's really funny. But this is the first instance where I think I can actually safely say that you didn't need the twist. Not because it like wasn't crucial to the plot or anything, or like because the Shyamalan contractual obligation, but like because I actually think they had a good ending. I think that if they kind of just like, in a weird way, I think this is one of the first instances where if you left it ambiguous, I'm not saying it would solve all the problems of the movie, but I definitely think it would kind of make that last moment, like between the parents, feel that much more emotionally resounding. Because like if you just ended with the parents and then ended with like kind of the kids who are now adults, like the next morning, like in their 50s, going through kind of like that same thing, I think that it actually, in a weird way, would work almost better. But then we keep going, and I'm like, okay, it's been we're at an hour 40 of an hour 49 movie. Okay, what's the twist going to be? Right. And I know what it's going to be because it's in the last like 5 Blumhouse movies that came out, where it's up. Of course, the resort has, of course, some scientific guild that's using them as a source of study. That much I figured out once they had like the flashing lights and the guy with the binoculars. That one was pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But then. Well, yeah.
Well, no, I just want to say before we get too far away from that moment with the family, the core family, the mother, father, daughter, and son on the beach, and the children watch their parents pass away, and then if they would have just ended it there, as they sit on the beach and they realize, like, okay, well, that's life. This is the cycle of life. Surely it wasn't the life we asked for, but we still got to spend time with our family, and we had a nice moment at the end there, and isn't that what it's all about, right? Cherishing those moments. And with Shyamalan being at that age where his kids might be moving out, moving on, growing up, getting older, the whole stuff that life takes us, the path, sure, it might have salvaged a star. But then it just goes and says, oh, you thought you were going to have at least one good moment in this film? And then continue down.
Yes. And then we get to the scientists. And again, I knew that this was going to happen because, again, this has been in like the last five Blumhouse movies. It was in Escape Room. It was in Belko Experiment. There were like 3 others that it was in that I'm not currently remembering, but where they always have the evil scientist that's overseeing everything in his little lab. And I'm like, okay, we know this. What is this going to be revealed to be? And the explanation is so fucking ludicrous. I'm like, I don't even know if I can laugh at this. That's how fucking stupid. Where they're basically using the beach area as a social experiment for residents that they bring to this island who are sick. Basically, and they're gonna put them in this environment where they die, literally just so that they can experiment with certain medicine and see if it cures them within a day, as opposed to like having to wait years. And my brain is already having to do mental jumping jacks in order to jump over that and be like, wait, what? And then the crazy part is, I'm like, so wait, you've had all of these people just die here just for the purposes of medicine, and like no one finds out, and it springs open all of the different problems, because once again, it does that thing that happens every single time you have one of these, which is where it takes away from any sort of quote unquote really interesting messages you would have had, and just makes it, okay, now we're back in Schlockville. We don't care about our character. This is all about just having the twist, having the gotcha moment. It's to the point where it's emphasizing the gotcha moment over the actual over any sort of like kind of, emotionally resounding story. And it doesn't work ultimately. Like, I'm sick to death of that. There was one point where I've talked about this before. The reason why all those twists in the late 90s worked is because it's one of those instances where you could go back and rewatch them and you would realize that the twist was like so perfectly and brilliantly built to, because there were subtle hints added throughout the story, right? And so the twist isn't really like a gotcha. It's one of those like, oh, it was this kind of a movie. And that works. These twists now, it's just like, Oh, so we're just trying to trick our audience. That's all we're trying to do. Like, to the point where it doesn't serve the story at all. Like, it's literally like, okay, well, what if I did this? And then that'll totally throw them for the loop. It's like, God, you already had, like, actually, like, kind of a really heart-pounding moment. Like, this is what I'm talking about when I say that he needs another writer. He needs somebody else in there. Again, not to the shade of your boy, but it's kind of exactly like what was happening with George Lucas when, again, he has all of these incredibly insane and out there and really interesting and engaging ideas and creative stories, but he needs a Filoni in order to kind of, okay, now channel that. How do we make it so that people are going to understand them? And Shyamalan doesn't have that person. Like, I still think he has one or two really, really great movies in him, right? But this definitely was not it, like, without a doubt. Like, I definitely will say this is probably the most amount of enjoyment that I've had with a Shyamalan movie since Split. And it's crazy to think that it's only been 4 years, but it's still not it. As far as kind of having having us be reminded, of that kind of creative that we had back in the day with Sixth Sense, where it felt like, okay, now we've got this really hot young filmmaker who really has this insane sense and knack for storytelling that could really give us something new and interesting. And it kind of sucks because he still has those notes there, but it ultimately doesn't work at the end of the day, kind of what he's trying to go for. And it makes the rest of the moments in this movie come off as, like, really laughable, really schlocky, really just kind of there for, like, shock value for shock value. Well, I still think the funniest line that came out of this was, oh, yeah, by the way, we should stop throwing in the mental patients with the fucking physical patients. I'm just like,
yeah, it's...
What?
I'll tell you this much. I completely disagree with you on 2 points when you say that he still has those notes there. I think they're gone. I think they're long gone. I mean, some of the directing in this film to try and hide the transformation, having like one half of a face on the side and seeing like a beautiful beach in the background and just multiple shots that just made no sense and offered nothing. Like, the camera is a part of the storytelling process, is it not? And so it really felt like we had like some novice, cine come in and just really... Whoever had to work with him on this film and has that on their resume, I really feel bad. I know it's a paycheck, and I'm sure anyone in this day and age, especially with the pandemic, was so happy to work. But geez, man, like the cinematography couldn't be any more egregious, any more atrocious. The set was just so boring. The caves were not interesting. Like, your environment's supposed to tell a story and enrich the setting you're in, especially in something as minimalistic as this, where we're literally stranded in one location. It really was just not a gripping film at all. And I think to compare George Lucas to Shyamalan is a very poor choice as a critic, because one clearly has talent and has brilliantly crafted a universe that has gone on to gross billions of dollars and multiple spin-offs, multiple fan material, multiple avenues of storytelling that even he couldn't have predicted, where the other has like 3 good movies and that's it, and he was known for a twist. So how much of that was just like his it factor in the moment? You look back on Signs, it's cool, but it didn't really age that well. I just like it because I saw it as a little kid and it has that special place in my heart. I was pretty into aliens and I thought, oh my god, this is freaky. But you watch it as an adult and you're like, doesn't really hold up the same way. I kind of think Shyamalan is what everyone hopes to be in the entertainment industry, because it proves the point that all you need is one hit and you will work for the rest of your life. He is a one-hit wonder with Unbreakable, in my opinion, and he's had a few coming close moments since then. So maybe he's like that band that can like open up for like the bigger band with their 3 hits. They give him 45 minutes. They're all from the glory days, but they know they're never going to be the headliner, right? That's just how I see it. So, look, we can agree to disagree on this, but I think we both agree this movie was absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, not good, ultimately. Not good at the end of the day. Like I said, I still, for in terms of intensive purposes, liked it more than certain others. Like, I liked it more than Glass. I liked it more than Lady in the Water, which is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I still can't even. That's a movie that like I couldn't even explain if I tried. Like, that's just fucking painful, that one. And obviously anything is better than The Last Airbender. But like if Shyamalan tells you that like he's checked out of a movie, like think about it this way: if the movies that he's invested in are bad, you can only imagine what like him being checked out. And of course, how he was the one that ended up directing the live action adaptation of one of the most beloved children's properties and something that is still hailed as like one of, if not the best children's animated programming ever. You can only imagine how that movie went. I'll spare you the details, but
For sure.
it's still not good. But
Spoiler
yeah,
alert, I've seen it. It's terrible.
Oh, it's awful. It's weird because 2010 had the two worst movies that I've ever seen, one of which I watched in college. That's The Last Airbender movie and then Birdemic, Shock and Awe, which is...
Wow, I can only imagine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Star ratings on this beast of a movie?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll let you go first.
Sure, yeah. I'm going to repeat a score that I've given out on this podcast once before this year because, like I said, there is art, and I think it's unfair to the people who work on this movie who have no say over the creative direction just to give it a full-on 0. So I'm going to go 0.2% of a star. That's how much this movie gets. That's how much I disliked it. I'm just trying to decide now what's lowest on my list. Is it Saint Maud? Is it Zola? Or is it Old? It's not Spiral. Spiral's above those three. So
damn, that's crazy. That's crazy. Ultimately, yeah. You're gonna be shocked by my rating, only because again of my interest, because of my interest in Shyamalan as a creator and kind of my relationship with him as time has gone on. I'm not giving him this score as far as like, oh, because he's still got one more movie in him aside from Sixth Sense, but only because I think that this movie was the most amount of promise that he's shown in a film in years. I think that again, if not for the trailer ruining it and kind of like that third act kind of coming in and screwing everything up, I think that he's got like half of a decent movie here. I think the acting for the most part could have been a lot worse. It could have absolutely been a lot worse, but I'm definitely kind of interested in where he goes and kind of, his sort of personal investment, that we'll say. I think that there are points where this movie is fun. The filmmaking is atrocious, most definitely, and the writing I definitely think could have used a little bit more, but for my money, this was actually probably the first movie about of like, okay, I can actually sort of get invested in this, so I'm giving this 3 out of 5 stars, ultimately. It's not super high in my mind, it's not even close, like, I couldn't ultimately justify giving it the 3 stars, but as far as it being like the kind of the same range as like, the Voyagers or the Saint Mauds or the Malcolm and Maries of this year, just movies that like were trying to have promise and then ultimately just did not work. Ultimately, I feel like I definitely got a lot more out of this movie. It was definitely more entertained than some of those other movies, but just for the Shyamalans of it all, it really sucks because this could have been something I think really interesting, and it's based off a graphic novel too. This is like his first adapted non-original work that he's done like in years. So I think that again, not to give him too much credit, but that might also be why certain elements of this seemed like better per se than others. But I don't know. That's just kind of what my take on it is. So with that being said, people, that's it. Those are our thoughts on the Ted Lasso Season 2 premiere and Old wrapping up July. We're getting into August next month. We've got so much stuff that we've got coming for you guys. We've got a couple more top 10 lists before we get into our next first time watch series. It's going to be a big one. Ultimately, we'll let you guys know what that is in a couple of weeks. We've got our next couple variety shows coming on Fridays. We've got our next episode of Talking Thrones, which just went up last night by the time this is done. Episode 2, The Nightlands. Professor Pat and I broke down. Let us know what you guys think of Ted Lasso and Old. If you saw it, let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Be sure to also click the like button and the subscribe button. Click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Chris, where can the good people find you?
They can find me anywhere on the internet at Christian Ivanko. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, to name a few. Ivanko spelled Evanko. I make music, which you can find very availably through the link in my bio. It's on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Google Music, SoundCloud, all the places. So just please go check it out through the link in my bio. I also have another podcast called Talkin' with Andrew and Chris. Talkin' spelled the same way we do it here. Again, available through the link in my bio. I hope to see you there. And I hope you guys go follow Dom. Dom, tell them where they can find you, man.
At Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. But you guys can really follow me, where I post twice a day, every single day, for our podcast here, the Talkin' TV Podcast. You guys can follow on Facebook and Instagram if you click on the descriptions in the link, or if you just type in that word that you see right there into Facebook and Instagram. We post every single day, twice a day. It's how you guys can stay updated with what we're doing. Go follow us there. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of the podcast. And as always, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.